Growing up, I spent a lot of time with my extended family in the countryside, and coming autumn or early winter, there was pickling time. It was the time when everything, literally everything that was harvestable and didn't have another appropriate use became a pickle. And by that, I mean green tomatoes, cabbage, of course, cucumbers, but also things like watermelons. Now, that was normal for me. I grew up in that medium, in that environment, and I thought that everybody does that. Little did I know that as I grew out of that environment and moved around the world a bit, that no, people don't ferment and pickle every single thing that you don't transform into, let's say, a jam or something like that. So I find myself today in a situation where I can grow a couple of vegetables on my own. So today I'm inviting you to join me in learning why and how to pickle green tomatoes. If you've seen any of my other videos and you decided to come back for more, then I assume that you are finding some value in them. If that's the case, please bless me with your kindness by subscribing to the channel, as it helps me grow and become better. In return, I promise to bring you higher value content each time. Thank you very much. The why is pretty simple. It was a byproduct of the growing season that they didn't really have a use for. Think about it like this. We all love ripe tomatoes, but when it comes to green tomatoes, they're sour, they're not appealing. So throughout the years, throughout the centuries, they came up with the idea of fermenting them, because by fermentation you change the consistency and the flavor of a product, no matter what it is: meat, vegetable, fruit. This way, a liability, a waste product, became an asset, and a delicious one, if I may say so myself. Now, I would like to pause a bit and talk about the ingredients really quick, just so I offer some context why we're using them. Because if you're not familiar with this method or with this cultural thing, you may find yourself scratching your head like, why using things like horseradish, for example, or sour cherry leaves? So let me just break it down really quick for you before you get put off by all of this insanity. The green tomatoes, as I mentioned, is just a waste product or a byproduct of the growing season. Right now where I live, it's the same climate as where my grandparents lived before. So I myself find it that after the main harvest is ripened, there's a couple of stragglers of green tomatoes where the plant tries to produce more, but it doesn't have enough time to ripen them because cold weather. Autumn and winter comes in and it just stagnates or even kills the plant itself. So that's why we're using green tomatoes. The cucumbers are there to bulk up the recipe and offer diversity. Let's say that, just like me, you're not going to have 100 kilos of green tomatoes to pickle. So if you're going to make a large enough batch to last you for the winter, you want to add enough bulk. So half cucumbers, half green tomatoes, and that's going to give you variety and enough mass to motivate you to do a large batch like I am doing today, 50 liters. The next ingredient on the list is dill, and Grandma always said that if possible, use fresh dill, dill seeds, and dill stalks, because each and every one of them has specific properties to keep this dish fresh for longer and super delicious. The carrots are primarily there to give color to the pickles, in case you decide to do it in a glass jar, so it looks good. But at the same time, if you like food, like I do, surely you like sweet and sour. And this is what the carrot is eventually going to become, a pickled, beautifully bright, sweet and sour vegetable. Now we're getting into the technical ingredients of this dish, and we're going to start with horseradish. Horseradish is something that I don't know how many people use these days anymore. I love to grow it just because it's a beautiful plant and because there's specific dish in my culture that require horseradish. Otherwise, just don't even bother. Just stay home. don't even try to make them. So the main point of the horseradish is to keep the pickles stiff, so they don't mush up, so they don't soften up, and they last for a very long time, i.e. at least the whole cold season, and maybe even beyond that. Apart from that, it's going to offer the pickles a bit of a heat, a bit of a spice, and that specific horseradish aroma that, if you have enjoyed horseradish in your life, you know what I mean. The mustard seeds mirror basically exactly what the horseradish does. It helps with the shelf life, it helps with the stiffness of the pickles, keeping them fresh and in good condition throughout the season, and also offers the classic pickle flavor. The weirdest ingredient of them all, in my opinion, is sour cherry leaves and branches, and trust me, it's a Romanian thing. Anytime there's something sour being made, or anytime there's something being pickled, this is a traditional ingredient. Now, I've looked into the science of it, and apparently the sour cherry leaves and twigs are high in tannins, and again, the tannins keep your pickles stiff. It stops them from decomposing. Basically, fermentation is in some way a decomposing process. So I think throughout generations and hundreds of years, people came up with all kind of, through experimentation, methods of keeping these pickles from just dissolving throughout the winter, because there's nothing worse than going through all the trouble of growing the product, pickling it, fermenting, and in the middle of winter, when you need probiotics, when you need health, when you need nutrition, to go into your pickling barrels and pull out nothingness, just like a soup of mushed vegetables. So the mustard seeds, the horseradish, the sour cherry leaves, they all have one purpose: to make sure that the vegetables don't go bad. Let's say they're the preservatives, okay? Lastly, we need salt and water. I'm not going to speak too much about water. We all know we need clean water and fresh. But when it comes to salt, make sure you use pickling salt, rock salt, mine salt, or sea salt. Now, sea salt is quite expensive where I live, but the other alternatives that I mentioned, they are affordable, they are readily available, and they're actually sold in shops for this purpose. If you don't find pickling salt, which is just rock salt. If you cannot find rock salt, look for mine salt. I buy mine in big 25-liter bags from the internet, online. They're cheap, and it lasts me a whole year, because I do not only fermentation projects, I cure meat, I season all kind of things. So, rock salt, pickling salt, or mine salt is the only one that is going to work here, and sea salt, of course, because it doesn't have any added chemicals, any anti-caking agents that will actually soften the vegetables out and mush them up if you use just table salt or any kind of other salt with additives. So please, as probably if you watched any of my videos where salt is used, I'll make your head like this when I talk about salt. Just use the correct types of salt, or don't bother. Don't waste time and money on this project, because it's going to be a disappointment at the end of it. Use the right salt, please. And the last thing I promise is a large pot, or a large container, or a large drum, or just a small 5-gallon jar, if that's the amount that you want to do. Because like I always advise any of you watching my videos, never jump in and do 50 kilos, 100 kilos, 25 kilos of anything that I mention on my channel. Just do small quantities, small amounts, try it, see if you like it, and then scale it to your wildest dreams, okay? But first, start small. Who knows, maybe you're not gonna like pickled tomatoes. What's the point in investing so much time and money? Yeah, small batch first, humongous batch, definitely if you like it, you're gonna want a humongous batch after. Okay, I've talked enough about everything. Now let's get to actually doing. So what follows next is the method. If you have all your ingredients ready, we can begin. So let's go. We want to start with the brine because we will use hot water for this process, and we need the water to cool off before we can add it to the container. The easiest way I can explain the brine is 25 grams of rock salt per liter of water. Now I don't know how much quantity you will make, so you adjust the liters based on the quantity that you will need. Start by adding the sour cherry leaves to the bottom of your container. They will act like a bed for the other ingredients while fulfilling their main job as a tannin factory that will keep all the ingredients nice and crisp after they are pickled. Then we'll add the horseradish and some cucumbers, some tomatoes, carrots, dill and mustard seed. Basically, we just want to do layers upon layers upon layers of all of our ingredients so that we get a nice distribution of not only flavors, but a nice distribution of the pickling or the fermentation itself. Make sure to keep a handful of dill twigs on the side because we want to add them as the last ingredient in the container. After that, we can add the brine. Before you put them away for the fermentation stage, it's very important to cap the container, the top of the container, with something that's going to keep all the ingredients submerged. Now, in commerce or online, you can buy weights, fermentation weights. I don't have those for this big container that I'm using today. So what I am using is what my grandma used, because when she pickled for winter, when she fermented vegetables for winter, she did like 200-liter containers, jugs. So what she used is planks. This is what I'm using as well. The most important thing here being to boil those planks before you add them as weights to keep everything underneath, because you don't want to add or introduce into your brine any fungi, any bacteria, pathogens and so on that's going to spoil or like destroy the whole work that you've done until now. So if you don't have fermentation weights, you can take my advice, well, my grandma's advice. Get a couple of planks, doesn't matter what wood they are, as long as it's not treated wood and all those poisons that they put in treated wood these days. Boil them for safety and then use them as weights by interlocking them one on top of each other. Usually 3 or 4 planks for a container should be enough. Now, in a long streak of weird things that I'm telling you in this recipe, you would wonder, why do you need to freaking use weights to keep things submerged if you already have a salt brine that should keep everything out and everything in preserved? Well, on top, on the surface of the brine, because it's exposed to oxygen into the outside world, usually fungi growth is going to develop or can develop. Now, traditionally, it's called a flower. This is just because people back in the day didn't understand how fungi and how mold worked. But regardless, it's a fungi, it's a mold that's going to spoil your batch. So if there's no vegetable, if there's no piece of dill, if there's nothing floating on the top but salt water, nothing is going to happen. If you have floaties, if you have solids, then there is a reason for the fungi, for the mold to be there and decompose. It's that simple, okay? Lastly, close the container with a lid, but close it loosely. We don't want to cap it all the way because it will ferment, it will produce gases. If it's hermetically closed, then there's a risk of the jar or container cracking under the pressure, and many things can go bad. Just for the first week, close the lid just a couple of revolutions while it's still loose. You can try that. Come on, I'm not gonna micromanage and mansplain everything, okay? I trust you. And we're almost done with this stage, and the only thing left to do is to store the container with the pickles in a cool, dark, dry space. Now it's very important to keep it outside of direct sunlight, because this process can be done anytime in the year. Don't make abstraction of the fact that it's autumn and this is when I traditionally do it. You can make these pickles any time of the year, even in the summer. So this is why I'm saying keep it outside of direct sunlight. Direct sunlight is going to stimulate and help proliferate bacteria, fungi, mold growth, all of these bad things that I mentioned before. So pantry, root cellar, whatever, somewhere where it's cold, dark and dry for 2 weeks. Not 4, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Next, I'm going to share with you a couple of tips and tricks that you can or cannot follow, up to you. But in the first week, we want to introduce oxygen into the container of the pickles to make sure that the fermentation is going to happen properly. And you can do this with a silicone or a rubber tube or hose by introducing it into the container and by blowing oxygen inside of the brine. It's that simple. Do this every 2 days for the first 2 weeks of the fermentation. If a thin white film develops on the surface of your brine, don't panic. It's a natural byproduct of the lactic acid bacteria that's actually doing the fermentation. Just keep adding oxygen, keep blowing through the tube inside of the brine, and it's gonna disappear in time. I promise. It's okay. After the initial 2 weeks fermentation, your pickles are done. You're done. You're set. You're ready for winter. Congratulations. If you don't have space to keep them into this large container like I've done, you can move them into gallon or smaller containers and display them in your pantry. Make all your friends and family and neighbors jealous of your beautiful, weird and funky new pickles that you've learned how to make. And then you can move them to their final resting place or destination. These pickles can be enjoyed just like any other pickle. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just another fermented vegetable. I personally love it in the cold winter months with heavy, fatty, porky dishes because it does cut really well through all of that fattiness. And if you're wondering what the heck I'm talking about when I say winter heavy dishes, this dish that you see in front of you is a traditional winter meal, which was basically made with what people had in the dead of winter. Primarily pork meat and sausages, cured aged cheese, eggs, pickles, and some kind of a bread or cornbread, whatever they had in the house. And while I get my winter on with this dish, I hope you guys will pickle some green tomatoes this year and try some new and amazing ways of enjoying what sometimes is considered a waste product. And before we part ways, please let me know in the comments what weird, funky, uncommon things you pickle or you ferment in your culture, in your country, because I'm always on the lookout to learning more about food from across the world. And if you found this video useful, please like it and share it with others so that it may get some traction. So we may use more of what we grow and waste less. See you next time.